Next in our program, we have Dr. Emily Scherzinger. She's a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster's Children and Youth University, where she studies the intersection of disability as well as childhood. In her spare time, she likes to read, play the drums, and hang out with her blind dog, Atlas. Tonight, in her presentation, Dr. Scherzinger questions the underlying ideologies that found the framing of lifelong learning in Western elementary education. This presentation is part of a larger body of work that uses disability studies to reimagine lifelong learning, not as a marketable skill, but as a pedagogical framework that offers opportunities to empower individuals as well as their communities. Please join me now in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Emily Scherzinger.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Emily Scherzinger, and today I want to talk to you about disability and lifelong learning policies in Western education. But I want to start with a bit of a story. By the time I turned 25, I had already broken 27 bones, not counting fingers or toes. Some of those breaks had come from frightful accidents, such as a broken arm from a cab driver hitting my bike. However, most of these breaks took place in more typical childhood circumstances. By the time I turned 25, I had already broken 27 bones. I just said that. But I was 9 when I broke my first bone on a school skating excursion. The very first one, a fracture on my left wrist. I was trying to race the boys in my class who were in hockey. I was convinced I skated faster than them. Misevaluating where my skate was, I kicked off the ice and got caught on my toe. I slammed to the ground. My mother, of course, panicked at the sight of my grapefruit-sized wrist when I got home and swept me off to the hospital. Kindly technicians walked me through my first x-ray, and this was back when patients would carry their own files of x-ray images between hospital departments. Eventually, as the years wore on and the list of fractures grew, my mother stopped panicking over my broken limbs. My x-ray file became too heavy for me to carry. I learned how to pop wheelies in wheelchairs. The casting tech at the hospital even learnt my name. I quickly became the adorable disabled person, appealing enough to the guilty consciences of able-bodied people because my disability always appeared to be temporary. The bone would heal, my cast would come off, I'd be normal again. I was always lauded for my resilience, for becoming ambidextrous at 12 years old. What these people didn't know or didn't see was the invisible disability behind these temporary injuries, joint hypermobility, which some are now calling the Bendy body disease. Celebrities are even sharing their diagnoses, raising public awareness about the condition. In an interview with Vogue, one of the world's biggest pop stars, Billie Eilish, said, quote, "I felt like my body was gaslighting me for years." The medical establishment is finally turning its attention to hypermobility disorders, including the one with which I've been diagnosed, which is hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or HEDS. It's a genetic disorder typified by faulty connective tissue, which is a major part of the human body. Connective tissue makes up parts of tendons, ligaments, skin, and the digestive system. The weak connective tissue leads to hyperflexibility, which in my case culminated in large gaps between my bones, weak tendons and ligaments, and of course, like I mentioned, lots of broken bones, lots of dislocations. And having a bendy body has greatly affected not only my life, but also my research as an academic. I currently study how disabled students are excluded from lifelong learning. We often understand lifelong learning as independent learning, self-directed learning, and it happens over the course of our lifetime. It is, of course, an important framework, and it's becoming increasingly popular in Western elementary schooling. These policies encourage the production of a labor force that is flexible and able to pivot according to a company's whims. Lifelong learning has thus become an incredibly important trait in the job market. As Wendy Brown writes, quote, "Consumption, education, training, mate selection, and more are configured as practices of self-investment where the self is an individual firm." So in this way, education has been reconfigured from a path toward individual and community empowerment to an investment in the self's market value. Those who fail to invest properly in themselves are morally and quite literally bankrupt. And overall, this individualization of education influences the treatment of disabled people, especially medically and socially. As a broad instance, people with disabilities are encouraged to adopt this narrative in which they're responsible for their impairment and for then overcoming their impairment. But in reality, this localizes disability. It's often intersected with societal and global factors. For example, the disabilities incurred from landmines in the Angolan Civil War are a direct result of American intervention in the country, in which the CIA funded and supported anti-government rebels. Disability is thus intersected with varying factors like gender, race, colonialism, and more. Removing this context causes disability to be individualized, and this individualization works to marginalize disabled students in the education system, as disability cannot simply be overcome. The Western educational institution relies on parameters of meritocracy, such as individual effort, will, and resilience to determine who is fulfilled and valuable and who is not. In this framework, disabled children and youth are framed as these docile, unfulfilled bodies, and students who are potential lifelong learners are often those who strive individually, outside of interdependency, to function as these independent learning units. However, disability necessitates interdependency. After all, I can't feasibly carry out a plan to go for a bike ride the next day if I wake up unable to walk. So rather than falling into the trap of individualization, disability requires the fostering of collective care, which necessitates a variety of skills such as community building, clear communication, adaptability, and, of course, flexibility. In this way, disability is antithetical to individualization. Disability fosters collective dependence upon one another and collaborative efforts rather than capitalist competition. After all, the skills and frameworks that come from living and learning while disabled are valuable and radical and liberatory facets of lifelong learning that capitalist agendas tend to suppress. So I ask, what if we use HEDS and disability more broadly as methodologies through which we critique the encroachment of economic ideologies on lifelong learning? What if we reimagine lifelong learning? What can we learn from the hyper-flexible in an economic environment such as transnational capitalism, which demands these flexible bodies for flexible accumulation? Using disability as a lens through which we evaluate our education practices encourages necessary skills, such as the acceptance of difference and different abilities. Disability also encourages critical thinking that challenges the adequacy of our current educational structures. And finally, introducing disability justice in the classroom supports imagination, the opening up of spaces for different ways of being in the classroom and the world. Ultimately, I agree that we need justice within our educational system. As people who have attended this institution of higher learning, we need to recognize that education outcomes reflect the societal inequality for those perceived as different. As a postdoctoral fellow at the McMaster Children and Youth University, I research how we can introduce disability justice into educational frameworks such as lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is important, and introducing disability justice into this demands that we take a look at what values underpin our educational system. Are values of capitalist accumulation and individualization truly the most sustainable practices to teach our children and youth? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for such a powerful presentation, Dr. Scherzinger. I think that you've really given everyone here a whole lot to think about. Here's a question from our audience. Can you think of some concrete examples of how public education systems can better incorporate a lens of disability and disability justice in the classroom?
That's a great question, Katie. One of the ways that we're doing that at the McMaster Children and Youth University is actually through the game Minecraft. I succeeded in pursuing a grant where we are using Minecraft to build a school in East Hamilton so that the grade 8 students who are moving into that school are able to access the school without actually even having to attend. They can attend assemblies, they can meet with their teachers through Minecraft. And the best part is that the grade 9, 10s, and 11s are actually building the school, the high school. So this is really exciting for students that have mobility or accessibility issues, or even just for students who are scared or anxious and worried about not belonging. So one thing I would say, although this maybe isn't the most concrete, is fostering a sense of belonging. I think that is a really important way of using disability justice in the classroom.
I absolutely love that. And I know my 9-year-old son would absolutely love that as well. So thank you so much. Are there any places in the world that you know of potentially that have educational systems in place that do a better job of being more inclusive and looking through a lens of disability?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think that because a lot of my research centers on Western education, I feel comfortable speaking to that. Europe has an incredible, very thorough policy on lifelong learning, but it does not include any disability justice. In fact, it advocates for the exclusion of disabled students, suggesting that they are not actually able to partake. However, what I will say is that Hamilton is doing an amazing job. Right now, Hamilton has some of the best policies on mental health care for students, particularly in the wake of the pandemic and the return to schooling. I'm always amazed by the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, and at MCYU, we work really closely with them. So I see all the ins and outs of the ways in which they employ mental health care. One of the policies that they have, they call the One Adult Ally. And so they really encourage teachers and staff to foster that sense of belonging that I was talking about with students. They've also employed Black Success Scholars at Bernie Custis High School. And they're doing some really amazing work to bring disability justice into the school.
Thank you so much. It's no wonder Hamilton's doing great. We have people like you, right? Thank you so much, Emily.